Jack Hawkins speaking on part of the I mean, they had
Good, how are you?
they had 5 or 6.
Ken Wade, Cole Dexter.
Yeah, Cole Dexter, Ken Wade, Jack.
Yeah. There's a whole Norman Abramowitz.
Yeah.
So it's great. We're very busy. Let's go. Do my stuff to the registrar. Beginning of my year, they do it. You're the new one. We're the new one. Don't forget it.
State legislature, the I would almost say it's a cut state aid basically. We're gonna change the rules. Yeah, you never change the form, you give us more. Yeah. Well, thank you. So you can pay more than you were.
Of course. And it's Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. We'll begin with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to budget season, our favorite season of the year, I know that. I would like first to take a motion to go into an open session of the Budget Committee. So I'll take a motion, Mr. Vondel, and a second, Mrs. Nardolillo. All in favor? Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce our budget co-chairs, Mrs. Mary Nardolillo and Mr. Ron Vondel. Both have great experience in this role, and we look forward to your leadership once again this budget season. And Mr. Four, should you
I'd be
get up
happy
and say
to.
something?
Yes. Yeah, I would be happy to. Well, welcome to the 2019-2020 budget season. Okay, this is, a little bit like Happy New Year, and as I say, I really do enjoy this opportunity to talk about our plans for the future, to talk about what we've done, and to also meet with our community to get input on where we're headed this year with our budget. Just a little bit about process and procedures. Ms. Nardolillo or Mr. Vondel will take questions, and we take questions from the Board of Education first. Once the Board of Education has finished that process, how are you? We have binders up here in alphabetical order. Okay. Once the board has finished with their questions, then either Mrs. Nardolillo or Mr. Vondel will provide the audience with opportunity to have questioning. We are live streaming again. Amanda, what is our medium this time for the live stream? We're using what, YouTube?
Yes, we're using YouTube.
Okay, so we're using, as an old codger, like I would say, that YouTube. For you all to enjoy for our viewers at home, to enjoy participation in the budget process. Do we have any idea of how many viewers are at home?
We have 5 right now.
Very good. Okay, great. Well, that's encouraging. So, 5 is a great start. So this year, when we talk about our budget this year, if we take a look at 2019-20, our first night really is to provide an overview and a context for our budget process. And so when we take a look at that overview and context, we're going to be focusing on our mission. We're going to be spending a little time on that. What are the, in other words, if you take a look up at here, these are the big drivers of our budget process this year. Okay, we're looking at 6 big drivers. Okay, the mission-focused budgeting. Mr. Hoot will be talking to us about the implications of the new federal legislation, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. Also about New York State school funding transparency. What that means for our budgeting process. It has altered the process, how we report expenditures, how we report our budget, projected revenues, and all of that. That's changed as a result of this year. The executive budget proposal is a budget proposal that comes from the governor's office. We are now in process here where there are negotiations that will be taking place between the 2 houses of the legislature, the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor's office. And then we usually come out with a budget somewhere around the 1st of April. We will also give you what our preliminary property tax calculation is for this year. We reported that to the state per law on March 1st. And so Mr. Hoot will be covering the middle 4 bullets there. And then we will talk about another important driver in this budget, and that just simply is enrollment and staffing increases that this is not the night we talk about staffing, but we're just talking about staffing increases that will be driven by enrollment alone. So as you take a look here, these are our 6 big drivers for this year's school budget. This provides us with our context. And I always come back to the mission, and this is how we really shape our budgetary process. And so we have a statement up there that encapsulates what we believe our mission to be for students, providing them the opportunity and necessary support to engage in relevant, challenging work which contributes to their overall academic and social growth and development. And then the second part of that is for the adults who work with our students, realizing that we are a human resource business and we need to invest not only in adequate numbers of staff, but in well-trained staff, provide them with the material and knowledge-based and skill-based resources they need to be able to do the very best they can. And so that is a statement that all staff, teachers, and administrators are part of a larger learning community, working together to build collective capacity in order to provide high-quality, relevant, and equitable education for all. So when we take a look at this work here, we also look at major pillars that are drivers to guide our work. And so we take a look at equity, and equity is very important here. And if we take a look at, the shape of North Colony, the shape of North Colony is wonderful. We are growing as a community. We are growing in diversity. So that means we have students who have more English language learning needs. We have students who struggle with poverty, more students who are on free and reduced lunch. We look very seriously at our mission statement, where the mission statement contains the words all students. And we take that all students mandate really very seriously. And so when we look at how we make decisions, and how we make decisions specifically with the allocation of scarce resources, equity is a major driver for that. We have to take a look at our student population and be honest and candid with ourselves as to who seems to be succeeding more than others. Okay, and when we look at that, okay, then that will be a guide and a driver to providing support for our students. Social and emotional health is also an important component there. So we look at, well, how will the decisions that we make contribute to this overall social and emotional welfare of our students? Last year, we made some significant steps forward in that. We added social workers. Again, we also added a clinic, embedded clinic in collaboration with Parsons and Northern Rivers in our school. I'm happy to report that after months and months of negotiations with the New York State Office of Mental Health, we were finally able to start our clinic up just about a week ago. So we're in the process of getting that going and working right now, but we have 2 clinicians who were included as part of last year's budget, and they are coming forward to become a part of our school mental health team as well. So social and emotional growth of all students in the district is important, but we're also realizing too that this importance is driven by the fact that we all have a vested interest in it, and that includes every staff member, not just staff members who are specifically tasked with working with our students in the area of social emotional health. Each and every staff member needs to be aware of the forces and the societal impacts on our students that contribute to social and emotional issues which ultimately impact learning. Academic excellence is also a key component of everything we do. And so we're constantly reviewing our program. We're constantly looking at how do we provide the resources in terms of staffing, in terms of professional development, to contribute to the optimal academic growth of each and every child in North Colony. And when you look at those 3 pillars, they really are not exclusive, okay? What they really do is they come up with a framework that talks about educating the entire child. So when you look at positive school climate, when you look at proactive instructional strategies that engage students and make them want to come to school, when you look at social emotional development, and when you look at individualized supports to meet the needs, the specific needs of each and every child, you see that these 3 pillars really come to play in concert with one another and work to provide an overall effective, complete education that recognizes the needs of the whole child: academic, cognitive, ethical, physical, psychological, and social, emotional, and socially and emotionally. So we look at everything through this lens of how do we meet the needs of each and every child, how do we provide for their entire social, emotional, and academic development. And so at this point in time, I will now turn the presentation over to Mr. Scott Hoot, who will talk about another driver in our budget process this year, and that is the Every Student Succeeds Act, or fondly known as ESSA.
So we're really entering a new era, and the first pillar that Mr. Core mentioned, equity. Equity is really the theme that drives both ESSA and the New York Transparency. If you take a moment to read that quote, you'll find that the first few words, per pupil expenditures, and disaggregated by each school. So in building the budget for this year, the disaggregation of funds to each particular school building has become not just a good idea, but a requirement. So what does that mean for building the budget? What does that mean for reporting? We must report, all districts must report by school level. It's tied to the federal aid. And for this upcoming year, for 1920, back up. For 2018-19, the federal requirement is to report expenditures, which will have to be reported by December 31st of 2019. So again, it applies to all districts beginning with this current budget that we are operating within. So come June 30th, 2019, when we close the books, then we're going to have to report all of those expenditures on a building level basis by the end of the calendar year.
So I'd like to interject at this point in time. This is unique for us. We have always budgeted overall. We might have building-based budget codes within our budget, but this is a new and different requirement, which has had an enormous impact on our process.
And similar to ESSA, on a federal level, we have the New York State School Funding Transparency. Again, you see another quote from the legislation, and it reads very similar to the ESSA legislation, capturing districts' projected district and school level expenditures by school building. Now, unlike ESSA, New York Transparency reports based on budget. So this upcoming budget year, 1920, once that budget is developed, that information will then be reported to the Department of State. That deadline will be August 30th of 2019 for the 1920 budget. And if a district should fail to comply, they have the opportunity to withhold state aid. And a lot of demographic data per pupil spending. Again, it's an equity-based reporting mechanism.
Maybe at this point in time, it would be just appropriate to pause and see if there are any questions about ESSA or.
And one other point, 76 districts in the state by legislation had to do this reporting last school year. Now 306, those 76 plus extras up to 306 statewide will be participating this year, and the balance the following year.
Okay, we'll open it up now to board member questions. Sandy?
I'm just curious. There's got to be a perceived problem. What is the problem that they're trying to solve with this? I know you'd probably be speculating, but I'm just curious.
I would only be speculating.
I think we could, yeah, we can probably fill you in on that.
Certainly on the federal level, they are worried about in major districts. Obviously, we have local districts, but in states where they have countywide districts, the inequitable funding that goes to a certain side of town, a certain section of the community. So now if you have to report it out by school and there are certain numbers of kids in each of the schools, those numbers should be relatively comparable.
So like North Carolina has countywide schools.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's
so at the federal level, that certainly makes sense. As New York State comes down, I think for us, we tend to have smaller districts, obviously here, but across multiple schools and looking at how we're making choices about funding. And it is not only related to per pupil expenditures in New York State, but it also is related to the success rate of certain schools within your district. So if a certain school is not performing as well on state measures, then they want to see that money is going to that school to improve that school and maybe not as much to another school that already appears to be doing well. So it will have quite a ripple down effect as they start to roll this out.
so they're in a data gathering.
Yes, they are.
And the state believes that this is an accountability measure to make sure, I mean, the end result is they want to ensure that the money is going where it should go. All right, so that, which I think the intent is honorable. And I think in that respect that, children who need the resources are getting the resources, and that you can explain why you spend the way you spend, and do that in a way that demonstrates essentially, this is kind of like the 100,000-foot view of this, but you can demonstrate that in a way that provides them with the confidence that you have a solid rationale that is fiscally sound and educationally sound in supporting children.
Thank you. I guess that makes sense. Sounds like a lot of work, but
right.
makes sense.
Any other questions by the board? Scott, I have a question. Have we been notified that we're one of the 309?
Yeah, 306, and yes, there's a list that's been out there for a little while, so
Okay.
we've been preparing for this eventuality for a number of months.
Is that based on a number of schools that you have?
Yeah,
Like if
districts
you
with
have
at least
over
four,
four-
with at least four school buildings.
Sorry.
That was my question. That was my
Okay, we'll open it up to questions from our community. Yes, sir, would you identify yourself?
I'm Iqbal Vora, Shaker High School.
Thank you.
I had a question for Mr. Kaur. You mentioned about the Office of Mental Health approval. The part I didn't get is, did we hire new staff?
I'm sorry, I missed.
Did we hire new staff?
No, what we did was we had a contract in the, that we arranged through Capital Region BOCES, so it was a shared service. That was budgeted for $35,000 for that particular contract. We do get aid back on that BOCES. We get about a return of about half on that.
We're also getting prorated because it took them so long to get started.
Right, that's a great point too. Yeah, we originally thought that this was going to be up and running in September. It finally is up and running in February, so we'll be prorated accordingly.
Yeah.
I had, Scott, you're saying here that if you don't meet your deadline, they can withhold state aid. What if, I'm not saying it would here, but let's say one school building's per pupil's dollars are very high and another's are very low. Is there a penalty for inequities right now, or is that down the road, or?
Not penalty per se, but there is a prescribed formula to rectify when you get to the next year.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Well, that leads nicely into my question. So if we have a situation like we do here where some of our things like special ed are more consolidated at some buildings versus others, what does that do? I mean, special ed students are just going to be more expensive per student. There's no way around that, and I think that's one of the strengths of our district is we do spend that money to make sure that everyone gets an education, but are we gonna get dinged on that by using that approach?
It's hard to say. Districts that have gone through one cycle now, and we've had the opportunity to hear from them, and there has, there's a narrative portion of the reporting requirement to describe how the funds were allocated. And, we have heard stories of going back and forth 4, 6, 8, 10 times before whoever is reviewing the file at Department of State is satisfied with the narrative and the explanation. That's the best I can tell you at this point, not having gone through it yet.
We've had to report to state on with the comparability, it's called. So we're kind of in contact with them, and they said they allowed us to kind of remove that student population and teacher population out. So I think it's still a work in progress for them.
Okay.
But we've already had that discussion with state ed.
I think the fluidity of ESSA is still, we can't underestimate that as well. It is not, our guidance and our direction has not been finalized by the state.
Why is it the Department of State that you report to? This in for New York State. Why is it the Department of State instead of Education or?
That's the department that was put in charge of evaluating the reporting documents.
That's kind of scary.
Okay, that makes some sense. Every once in a while, I look for something that seems logical, but just me.
Good luck with that.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, Mr. Cora, we're good to go.
Great.
Okay. All right, so let's dig in a little bit of the economics of the governor's budget proposal. And he put out a $956 million increase for next year, about 3%. The lion's share of that comes through foundation aid and some of the other expense-driven aids such as building, transportation, BOCES, and special education. And you can see the dollar values attached to each of those areas and the percentage increases. And some of these percentages are rather high, 9.2, 4% that's being projected in current law that the state will need in total statewide to be able to fund the aids in those categories. And we'll touch on that in a little bit in regard to another proposal that came out of the executive budget. This is just a snapshot of what the executive budget has looked like over the past few years. This excludes grants because a big chunk of that $956 million has some grants attached to it. But if you just look at the foundation aid and the expense-driven aids and compare those year over year, this is still fairly substantial, but the second lowest in the past 5 years. And I think the foundation aid was almost identical year over year in the executive budget. And then when, in the final analysis, you can see in many years, it's right around 200, 227, just with a couple of exceptions there, the 417 and 439 in terms of dollars added between the executive budget and the enacted budget. So what's that mean for North Colony at this point in time, just isolating North Colony and the executive budget? So foundation aid, not much there, just a little over $47,000. The other areas that you see on this chart, transportation, building aid, the reorg incentive aid, BOCES, special education aids, and the various materials aids. Percentage-wise, let's jump to the middle there, the operating reorg incentive aid. For those of you that have been around a while, might remember that $285,000 comes off of that incentive aid each year until it's exhausted. So after this year, there'll be 3 more years, and then that will be exhausted. So if you look at transportation, building, BOCES aid, special education aid, with the exception of building aid, those are all year after aids. So dollars spent this year, plugged into a formula, generate aid for the following year. Building aid is an exception to that. That's a current year aid based on current year expenditures. So drilling down a little bit in greater detail, one might ask, BOCES up 100%. How can that be? Keep in mind it's expense driven. So dollars we spend this year, again, get plugged into a formula, generate aid for the following year. Why would it be up so significantly? Well, we've analyzed where we buy our services, and when it has made sense, we've driven more purchasing of services to BOCES. Therefore, it has generated more state aid in that particular category. The other areas are up fairly substantially as well in terms of percentages, 10% in a couple of areas, and 85% down in the special education area. Some of our aid ratios have ticked up a few points. So when that happens, then that alone can drive some more state aid, and that's not isolated to North Colony. That's happened a lot in the capital region when you look at the districts. Most everybody's aid ratios have ticked up a few percentage points. That's another thing we'll come back to in a couple of slides that the governor is trying to get at. So overall, right now, almost 1.3 million up on the revenue side in regard to state aid. So the governor has put out some other proposals, and please note in red, this does not affect 1920, but this proposal would affect 2020-21. And this is an interesting proposal in that it would take all of those expense-driven aids and lump them into one aid category. Why would that proposal be put out? Because it would be easier to budget for those and control the growth in those if they were all lumped into one particular area. That seems to be the only motivating fact that I can come up with. So also what happens is building aid in particular, so some, in our case, up 10%. So Governor has also proposed a new tier of building aid for projects approved after July. Why would that happen? Again, to start to control the growth in a particular area, that being building aid. So again, the services aid would combine all of these various categories: textbooks, library materials, software, hardware, BOCES, special education, transportation, special services, academic enhancements, high tax, charter. All of those would just be lumped in together in some manner to be determined and then capped by rates of inflation and enrollment growth. Will this come to pass? We'll see. Would it limit growth in all of those 8 areas? Certainly. Would it reduce our revenues in those areas? Certainly. And some might say it's a cost shift from the state to the local taxpayer.
It is.
We would say that, yes.
So the building aid as a proposal is pretty far-reaching in what I would say almost a complete revamp of what we know today, in an effort, again, to lower the percentage that the state devotes to building projects. I saw a stat put out by New York State School Business Officials Association, and in the capital region they were projecting a 10% reduction for districts in the capital region, and for low need districts, which we would fall into that category, could be upwards of 20%. So if you think about the cost shift on big dollars, it's very significant. Just a few other points that relate to school districts of significance. And one is a proposal on school bus stop arm cameras. There's no particular aid or funding source for that, but a proposal that any fines levied would then come back and somehow offset the cost of those stop arms.
Yeah.
Okay. The tax cap permanent's a proposal that's on the table. That's been out there in the press quite a bit. The basic star exemption, I'm not sure the motivation behind this one, but it would not affect those that get the check, meaning you apply for it and you get a check in the mail in regard to your star credit, as opposed to the historic method of having it come off of your assessment. So the threshold would change from $250,000 to $500,000 and vice versa. So I'm not sure the motivation in that, other than maybe people will forget and not file for the credit. So the tax cap, we always like to see where we sit with this calculation right off the bat in budget season. So as everybody knows, it's really not a 2% cap because there's a number of things that modify the 2%. CPI certainly being one of them. Growth in taxable values can also affect the calculation. And then the standard capital exclusions and pilots also affect the calculation, usually quite significantly. So this year it is 2%. In prior years it has been lower than 2% due to very low inflation. The growth in our taxable values that apply to the formula this year is 1.25%. So right off the bat, just adding those two together, it's about 3.25%. This year, the capital exclusion will add $163,000 to the formula, and the pilots will reduce the calculation by just a little over $1,500. Putting it all together, the tax levy limit or the cap comes out at 3.38%.
So I think it would be good for us to stop and perhaps have questions at this point.
Sure thing. Do we have questions from the board?
Nope.
So we'll jump right up to our community and faculty and staff, administrators. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So to summarize what you were just saying, basically the governor is saying they're going to stop sending as much state aid and tax landowners more.
I really don't want to speak for the governor.
It seemed like the only conclusion there.
I think one of at our next meeting, we can put the addresses, the contact information of our local state legislators, and that would be Senator Breslin, Assemblyman Steck, to write them, and if you feel that the governor's proposal for consolidating expenditure-based aids is not something that you would feel they should support or that you want to make your voice known, we certainly can provide you with that contact information as well. Certainly, what we have learned here from the Association of New York State School Business Officials and the like is that the impact on school districts in this region, and particularly a low needs district like North County, would be significant. So again, it's not a factor for this year's budget, but it's certainly something that we need to be aware of as well. Also be aware too that other associations besides educators are very much interested in this. When you look at expense-based aids, for building-based aids and the like, industries supported by school construction industry, design industry, architects and the like are also very interested in this. So it's not, just the education lobby whining again. It's it also has the interest of a lot of different interest groups in New York State. So we certainly can provide you with that information, that contact information at our next meeting.
And I just want to add to that Mr. Kaur and Mr. Booth, and I know our board officers met with those legislators this year like they do every year, voice their opinion, to whine a little on our behalf. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Okay, so it's usually in this first meeting that Mr. Kaur will go over some of the priorities for the budget, things that he was thinking about. So last year, you might remember, and he alluded to this earlier, one of the priorities we had was attending to students' mental health needs. So we added the social worker, we added the clinic. There were safety was a main pillar last year that we were looking at, so we added the SRO. And you saw earlier on that we have these three main pillars. So last year we spent a lot of time and effort in looking at social emotional health and well-being. We also looked at the pillar of academic excellence in doing a district restructuring. We restructured our administrative team to have K through 12 supervisors and realigned our curriculum and instruction team. We added the district director of teaching and learning position so that we are better prepared for going into the next stage of new standards that New York State is currently rolling rolling out. And then, as Scott just explained, with ESSA and with the New York State funding laws, we're really under this prism of equity. And how are we taking the resources that we're fortunate enough to have in this district and making sure that we are distributing those equitably? So really, in thinking about what is it that we really want to focus on this year, there's only one focus. It is the kids are coming and coming and coming. The enrollment continues to rise at incredible levels. And I don't think that we can talk about this year's budget fairly without looking at this year and the upcoming year of 1920 and the year after of 2020, 2021. Next year will be the last year that we are configured as a district as K6, 7, 8, and 9, 12. The following year, 2020 to 2021, will be when we make the conversion to K5 buildings, a 6-8 middle school, and a 9-12. And so both of those, that big change combined with the enrollment push we're having, this was just a picture of a second grade class. I didn't squeeze as many kids in as I could. This is just the size of our second grades. We are really running out of room. As the demographer had projected so long ago when we started this process, we would hit the enrollment growth heavily at the elementary level. That has come true. We've seen some enrollment growth at the middle school and at the high school level, but it really is hitting at the elementary level. In his projections, next year is to be the worst year of enrollment growth if his projections are accurate, and then it levels off at the elementary. So next year will be our tightest year because we'll still have 6 grades in the elementary. So that is the 1 year, and I want to show you some numbers. In looking at this, it's quite astonishing. So I started with where we are right now in 1819 and said, well, let's go back about 4 to 5 years. Let's just look at numbers by elementary building alone. And you can see that Blue Creek has not changed that much because we reduced a section of kindergarten at Blue Creek to make room for a special education class that we needed to put in Blue Creek. Look at Bout Hills in 5 years from 460 to 572. I mean, this is huge. Forts Ferry has gone from 454 to 540. Latham Ridge has gone from 415. Remember when Latham Ridge took on Maplewood because it was lowering in enrollment? 415 to 542 this year. Loudonville has gone from 295 to 333, which isn't much, but there's not a lot of room in that building, so that's about as many as we can move. And Southgate, which at one time was going down, if you've been in the process a long time, to a 2-deep building, is now back up to a 3-deep building and on its way to becoming a 4-deep building in certain grades. It's gone from 404 to 455. And then for next year, 1920, these are the projections. So this is from the demographer's projections as of December of 2018. So these are not the projections he made back in 2016. He's revised them. I've taken his projections. I factored in what the enrollment was in December and what the enrollment was as of February. So these are where the projections go. Blue Creek is going back up to 530. Bout Hills goes over 600 for the first time. Forts Ferry goes to 566. Latham Ridge to 548. Loudonville actually dips down to 328. And Southgate, once in the 300s not too long ago, was only at 404. It was in the very close, is up to 490. So that's almost a 500-person elementary school. So overall, we're projecting that we'll have over 3,000 students at the elementary level next year. We are 1 year away from getting the 6th grades to the middle school. It can't happen soon enough. We are cutting corners everywhere. Our class sizes are very large right now, and it's not because we can't hire teachers. It's the classrooms can't get built soon enough. Very happy to report that the construction is moving in a very timely fashion. The additions to Bout Hills and to Southgate will both be ready to open in September of 2019. So we can have those as swing spaces, and we are going to need them. These projections look fairly accurate. So in this period from 2014-15 to 2019-20, our elementary is up 539 students. So that's almost a whole nother school of elementary students. So the families keep coming, and we are very fortunate because that is not the case for a lot of districts upstate New York. What does that look like? Whoa, this chart's big. These are the number of sections that we have at every grade level. Everywhere where you see a red asterisk is where we are going to add a new section next year. So currently Blue Creek has 3 kindergartens. Next year we need to make them 4 deep. This will be the first time that we have 3 buildings 4 deep at kindergarten. That'll be Blue Creek. Bout Hills will stay at 4 deep. Southgate will stay at 4 deep. Southgate was supposed to be a bubble. They had 4 deep this year. They were supposed to reduce, and then we were going to let this bubble go through like we have over here at Forts Ferry. However, right now we have 32 more kids registered for kindergarten than we did at this time last year. So that is more than one section. So either we have a set of parents who are really organized and they're getting their kids all registered and they're not going to show up in August, or we're going to need another section of kindergarten. We're going to need it. So we're going up to 19 sections, so that's an additional section of kindergarten that we're planning for the budget. This was 4 deep. Currently, the first grade is 3 deep, so this group's going to move up, so we'll need another section of first grade. If you remember, again, if you've been here before, you know that Southgate had gone down to 2 deep for a while, and then we were slowly building it back up to 3 deep. This is the year when 4th grade was supposed to go up to 3 deep next year. However, our entire current 4th grade throughout the district is so large that we need another section of 5th grade somewhere. So we have the room in Southgate. So instead of waiting till next year to move up, we're going to move both these up at 3 deep in the same year, because we don't have, most of our 4th grades are sitting at 30 right now. So we'd have to assume nobody moves in who has a 5th grader, and that's just not a fair assumption. So we'll be adding 3 new sections at Southgate next year. That's why they're getting such a big bump in their size overall. Bout Hills is on its way to becoming a 4 deep building. By the time this is done, they will be the only 4 deep elementary building across all grades. So they will have 4 deep in kindergarten and 1, which they have now, and then the first graders will become 2nd graders. So we'll add, each year we'll add another section at Bout Hills. Whoops. And then the other piece is, this is that one little tiny cohort where we reduced a section at Bout Hills, or excuse me, at Blue Creek. So that is staying 2 deep, and that is giving us, because there's literally only 1 room left. And so the only reason we can put a 4th section is because this is 2 deep there, because basically it was always designed to be a 3 deep building. So we're using every nook and cranny for next year in the elementaries while we're still K6. You can see the total number of sections across the bottom, and you can see the total number that we're adding here. So our numbers are increasing overall, so we have to add these elementary sections. And then just as the population increases, some interesting stats that Brenna Muldoon, who was here tonight, shared with us about the E&L population, that has increased too. So we went back to 2014. We had 167 students who were English language learners in the district. As of October, that's when we file our BEDS reports, our state reports, we had 334. As of February, we had 346. So just from October to February, with our new entrants moving in, we went from 334 to 346. And our projection is that we'll have 433 English language learners. So we're going from 167 to 433. So our population is increasing. This is kind of a fun chart if you like a lot of different colors, but there's just some things to look at here. If we look at, this is the number, and this is astonishing to me, this is the number of English language learners per building at the elementary level. Because it always felt like we had a lot of English language learners. If we look at these numbers by building, you can see how much they're changing. So if we take, this down here is Loudonville in the darkest blue. So in 2014, there were 6 English language learners at Loudonville School. As of October, so this doesn't even factor in all the people who moved in between October and February, that went to 22. So 22 is still not a lot in one building, but when you think that 5 years ago it was only 6, that's a pretty significant increase. If we look here, Forts Ferry is this silver color. They were at 34. They went up to 61 last year. They're down. It looks greater than it is because the numbers are small, but they're at 57. So you can see that the populations are almost doubling. You can see here, this is Blue Creek. Blue Creek had 27 back in 2014. Now we have 44. The yellow is Latham Ridge, which had 19, and now they're up to 44. So you can see where we have a larger population of E&L at the elementary level. And we have the same at the junior and senior high. So as families are moving in, so in blue, this was the junior high. Back in 2014, there were 9 English language learners in the whole junior high. This year, as of right now, there are 34. So that's a significant increase. And for the high school, we had 25, and that is up to 42. With E&L, and we'll get into this as we do all the staffing, when we do the staffing night, but there are also new regulations about the way we deliver E&L services, which requires an intensity of service depending on the level of English that the child has. So every one child does not get the same amount of service depending on his or her need. So as we go through that, you will see that we will, as we're going to need more classroom teachers, we're going to need more E&L teachers as we continue this upward slope. So what does this mean for the enrollment growth at the middle school? It's still pretty close to where it was. In 15-16, it had 861 kids. Right now, it has 896. So this is exactly what the demographer was telling us. That it was going to hit at the elementary. It has not yet made its way to the middle school. Next year, it's projected to be at 870. It actually goes down a little bit. This was when we were having those smaller cohorts, back when Southgate was too deep. They're kind of in the middle school now. And then when we open it in 2021 and we bring the 6th grades in, it's projected to open up at 1,295. And it was projected to be about 1,303 by the demographer. So right now, our updated stats are saying that that was pretty close to what his original projection was. The high school, again, same thing, was at 1973, 15-16. Right now it's at 2018. It's projected to be 2025. Then again, it goes down a little bit. So right now, these two schools are the ones that are more stable, but everything that's those 3,000 kids in the elementary, those cohorts are only going to grow as they start to move up to the middle school and high school. So as we start to look for each year's budget, we have to look at where this is going because teachers will need to follow with these students, obviously. So we will do a whole night on staffing, and one of the things that we talk about are all proposals, new programs, different changes. What we're talking about tonight, just to give everybody a forecast, is these are just teachers we need based on the number of students in front of us. This is to perform at exactly the same level we are right now. This is nothing new added to program. This is simply to serve the amount of students we'll have. So you saw all the new sections we're going to need next year. A new kindergarten at Blue Creek, 2nd grade at Bout Hills, 1, 4, and 5 at Southgate. We need a 0.4 at the high school for science. We need 1 for elementary E&L and 1 for secondary E&L. So without even looking at any program requests, just to serve our students, that is an additional brand new 7.4 teachers into the budget for next year. The following year, because I think we have to look at how these roll out, that's going to be 2020-21. That will be the first year of the middle school. So what we can project right now, Bout Hills is on its way to becoming a 4 deep elementary. So we're going to need these kids who are in 2nd grade. We're going to need now a new 3rd grade teacher there. So we'll need a new teacher in Bout Hills. The middle school for grade 6, there are going to be 5 halls in the middle school. There are 4 core subjects, English, social studies, math, and science. So 5 times 4 is 20. We will need 26th grade teachers in the middle school. Across the district right now, we currently have 16. So we have to get to 20. So we need 4, for 6th grade, we need 4 more 6th grade teachers the following year. But don't forget that year that it first opens, we're bringing in a 6th grade and a 7th grade. Remember, the 5th and 6th graders are leaving together. So we have to have 4 7th grade teachers for that new hall. So we have 4 halls right now. They're all fully staffed for 7th grade, but we're adding a 5th hall. So we're going to need an English, a math, a social studies, and a science teacher for 7th grade. And each hall at the junior high has its own counselor. So they will need their guidance counselor. So regardless of whatever else happens at the elementary level, we can with confidence project that we will need a minimum of 10 teachers the following year based on enrollment alone. So the reason we're putting this up tonight is just to say, you know, Mr. Core usually starts with, these are going to be our budget priorities. This is our priority. Like, this is it. Like, it's coming. We knew it would be coming. We have to factor that in. So you're not going to hear later on in the budget season all these brand new program requests and all these big ideas, because this is going to have a significant impact on the budget, of course, this year and next year. So these are totally due to enrollment. We're gonna have the kids, the numbers are already here. These are the teachers we need. The one thing that is not factored in, because we're still working through this, it's easy to see when I have X number of kids that I need a first grade teacher, a second grade teacher. What we have to figure out, and we're still working through, and we'll have it by the end of the budget cycle when we hit staffing again, is exactly what that means for special areas. So that's art, that's music, that's PE. Those teachers, in a lot of cases at the elementary level, as you well know, are shared across buildings. So we have to look at travel time, we have to look at all those pieces. But as Southgate, for example, picks up 3 new sections, so what fits in the librarian's day, the art teacher's day, the music teacher's day, the PE teacher's day, will be factored in, and we're working on that right now, and we'll have that by the time we get to staffing. So that 7.4 could go up. And the other piece we don't have factored in yet are our special education needs, because we're still working through that process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ford, unless people want to do questions.
I actually have a question.
Yes, please.
At Southgate, is that based on children moving into that area, or is it overflow? Is that included and we just have the space at Southgate?
Correct.
Okay,
So there are more moving in than you would think, but Southgate still tends to be more landlocked than the north end of town. So some of it is from overflow, and because of the 5-room addition, we have more swing space in there.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when the junior high school goes to a middle school, all the 6th grade teachers that are in the elementary schools currently, will they move, and will that affect that number?
So
They could.
sort of. So what we need is, we know we currently have 16 6th grade teachers. Some, one is retiring this year, so some may retire before 2020 happens. We are in a process right now where we are working with our teachers and our teachers union to get the people who are interested in transferring to the middle school. So if there are people who teach 6th grade who are interested in transferring, there are people who teach other grades who are interested in transferring. 16 people from some level of the elementary will be moving, but we need 20. So no matter what, we'll have to hire 4.
Gotcha.
So-
but they will be, I mean,
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
So a lot of those are already here.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Absolutely.
Second. Any other board questions? So we'll open it up. Do we have any questions from the community? Sam?
When you move the 7th grade or the 6th grade,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a 5th hall,
Mm-hmm.
is that new hall not going to have any 8th grade students?
Correct. So in the first year,
For the first year.
it will be 6th and 7th grade only, and
Okay.
then the second year will be 8th grade, because what we don't want to do is take the kids who are in the other 4 halls and peel off a layer. So the first year it'll be 6 and 7 only, and then in the second year it'll be 6, 7, 8. So if you're thinking ahead, that means the following year we're going to need 4 8th grade teachers.
Is there concern about, and I don't know how our system works, I don't have a middle schooler yet, but is there concern that those 6th and 7th graders will lose mentorship or whatever by not having 8th graders in their hall?
Well,
And do we have ideas on how we might counteract that?
We are working through some of those processes. So we're talking to the current 6th grade class. They're going to be the 8th graders. So we're like, you guys are going to have to be really good friends around the building. But we'll have to work through that piece, because that hall will have fewer kids in the first year.
So then every elementary will no longer have a 6th grade, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Everybody will be K-5.
A couple questions. What is the current average class size for the elementary?
They are very close to their maximum. So K is at 23. 1 is at
25.
25.
2's at 27.
2's at 27.
3's at 29, and 4, 5, and 6 are at 30.
I will say this, we have an oddly small, and this is where they're not going to feel all that much relief, we have an oddly small cohort actually right now in the 6th grade. So those can go up to 30, and actually those aren't really at 30. In a lot of the cases, they're at 25. It's the last sort of end of that smaller group. That's why the junior high isn't going to go up that much. Some years we've had a really big sixth grade, so when they get out of the elementaries, they feel like a little breathing space. But ironically, of all the grades, almost all the buildings have their smallest cohort in the current sixth grade.
So once the sixth grade gets moved, what's the projected class sizes?
Once the sixth grade gets moved, it won't impact until as we get Bout Hills 4 deep, it will spread sort of that north end of town. But when it gets to the junior high, the 6th, 7th, and 8th with the 5 halls is projected to be about 25, which right now they're about 30, so they will go down a little bit.
Overflow with busing right now. So I live in Maplewood, so I remember that very.
Yep.
Half the neighborhood goes to Latham Ridge, half the neighborhood goes to Blue Creek. Is that projected to change after the sixth graders move?
I think it was really, there were approximately, I believe, 70 some odd students in Maplewood at the time of the closure. I believe 52 of those students went to Latham Ridge. And then I think there were something like 25 to maybe 30 that were at Bout Hills.
Okay.
They did not go to Blue Creek, they went to Bout Hills.
Is that where they're going? Well, I know half the kids are going there at 8 o'clock and getting the bus, and the other half for 8:30. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So we just.
So I mean, historically, that's where it was.
The question still stands: is that projected to change now that there's more room and they'll just take one bus and make life a lot easier for everybody?
I think what you'll see in the future is this. So we have more space in the north end of town with Bout Hills. So we've created 7 additional sections of students out there, so we can flow more students into Bout Hills.
Okay.
And so that's going to be one that zone might become more fluid. I think what we've also been able to achieve with flexing our zones, and I think the enrollment burst has caused us to do this, but I think one positive offshoot of that is that class size at the elementary schools per school, comparing school per school, is fairly consistent and constant. Whereas when the zones were completely rigid and the like, we would have variation in kindergartens. For instance, you might have a situation where one school might have 14 kindergartners and another school might be at the max at 23. Now we're all now we're all pretty much in the same ballpark in terms of numbers of students. So that would be a goal that I would shoot for. And if it means that we have to flex some zones, I mean, what we could guarantee is that we will not separate families. We would also guarantee that once you start as a kindergartner, you complete in that school.
That was my main question.
But I think, one of the things that realtors do, which they shouldn't, but they say, well, you live here, so you're a Bout Hills zone. And they really, that's not entirely true anymore, because we do have zones that can swing between Bout Hills and Latham Ridge, between Blue Creek and Latham Ridge, and so on. And that's really to keep class size under control and balance.
So we go to Latham Ridge, so we're curious how that got determined.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Bet.
Yes.
My question is actually one that my 7-year-old at Loudonville asked me the other day. He'll be happy that I asked it. So at Loudonville specifically, I think this is really for the year 2021. So when there's no longer 6th graders there would then be 2 classrooms that would open up. So what happens then? Do you add additional sections, or do you just bring more students in?
No, they're so as part of the building project, that building is getting reconfigured where the grades are within the building, and then they are getting an addition next to the library, which will be their innovation center. All the buildings are getting that, so all those rooms are called for other purposes in Loudonville.
Thanks.
Sure. Mr. Cord, do you want to do this?
I do.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gilson. Here we go. Okay, so when we are working through our budget, these are the key principles that guide our work. And I think, obviously there is the focus on the mission. And the mission, again, is the prism through which we make our budgetary decisions. When you take a look at what we work with, going back to the pillars that we discussed in the initial side, academic growth is important, social emotional growth is important. We look at educating the entire child. And really, when you consider it, those of you who have been in the education business a long time know that there is a pyramid called Maslow's pyramid. And in Maslow's pyramid, at the base of it really is social emotional learning. So if a child is not, feeling well socially and emotionally, the other aspects of learning and the other aspects of school do not follow. So that is not frivolous. It's vitally important, and it's central to our mission statement here. So when we look at that, we mean what we say when we talk about academic, social, and emotional growth being a guiding principle for this budget. Basically, it's what is the guiding principle of us as a collective whole when we prioritize, when we set, when we plan for our budget. And basically, we realize the importance of community, okay? And we realize that as an educational community, we are bound to work together and bound to follow our mission and bound to offer the very best we can to each and every child. And where we see deficits, we must remediate such. And therefore, we are always struggling at this time with a tax cap, with more limited resources. And so we realize that the allocation of resources is not getting exponentially larger, but we must do everything we can to reallocate, to study, to make change so that we can more effectively, efficiently, and equitably provide that equitable experience, that a complete social, emotional, and academic quality experience for each and every one of our students. So one of the things that I would like to do during the budget process also is to kind of go back and periodically throughout the budget process, and you can see our meetings here, to take a look at some of the big initiatives that we included in last year's budget. And if you remember, we did talk about social emotional wellness with the clinic. The clinic is just up and running, but we can at least provide you with the narrative of the clinic and, also deal with some aspirational conversation here for the clinic. On the 14th of March, we will have a meeting here where we'll talk about the Student Resource Officer program. The Student Resource Officer, Officer Anthony Sidoti from the town of Colony, will be with us. Our high school staff, administrative staff, will be here to talk about the impact of that program on the district. So I would like to invite you on the 14th to that particular presentation. You also remember, too, that we added to our fitness and wellness center at the high school last year. So we'd like to provide you with an update on that. In addition, we have also, as promised, done a safety audit with the New York State Insurance Reciprocal, our insurer, with the town of Colony Police. We can go over some of their recommendations. And if you remember, we targeted over $600,000 in the budget for security-based enhancements, so we can talk about the planning that will go into that as well. So Ms. Skeels has also mentioned too that we've undergone a reorganization. We are in the first year of that reorganization where our high school 9-12 supervisors became K-12 in English, language arts, in social studies, math, and science. We can give you an update on that. We can give you the update on Mr. Deneen's position as the Director of Teaching, Innovation, and Learning. And so, as we go through this, you can see that we have 6 remaining budget meetings. Sorry, that's 7. So on Monday, the 11th, we will be talking about our maintenance projects, our interfund transfers, maintenance custodial, transportation, equipment, and debt service. On the 18th of March, instructional technology, technology equipment, Smart Schools Bond Act, what we have left, what we could intend to do with that. Monday, the 1st of April, anticipated building enrollment, new programs and initiative. Then April 8th, proposed budget. We should be finalized by that time. We should have a finalized tax cap. Hopefully we'll have a state budget. We'll see what the revised revenue numbers are from the state property tax report card. The board officially adopts the budget on Wednesday, April 17th. That's a regular monthly meeting. We also have a meeting on May 8th. That is a public forum, and it would be meeting the candidates for the Board of Education. And then we would have the annual budget vote and Board of Education election, followed by a meeting to certify that. Okay, so you can see it's going to be a busy spring. It's a long way to the 21st of April, but this is the plan going forward. Are there any questions at this particular juncture? We will continue to have a live stream option available here. We will post after the meetings, the notes of the meetings. Any PowerPoints will also be put up on our budget page, so you can reference all the materials. And if you have any questions, concerns, suggestions, please contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fields, and thank you, Mr. Hoot, and thank you, Mr. Core. Thank you, Mrs. Nardilillo and Mr. Vondell. I'll take a motion to close out this budget meeting. Mrs. Pinebird, I'll take a second. And Mr. Shavo, and all in favor? And all in favor of adjournment? Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.